What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the altar again, and this time we are here with Ville Valo. Thank you so much for being here. It is great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. How heavy is New York at the moment?
Pretty damn heavy. Pretty damn heavy. If you're talking about the city, it's at its heaviest it's ever been. Here in the altar, I think it speaks for itself.
Well, it does indeed. And to be honest with you, I was quite surprised to see that in a very positive sense. It's good to have some people keeping up the faith, you know.
Oh, I appreciate it. I figure it's better than the typical, headphone and microphone, video, YouTube starter pack.
It's a wonderful alternative. I wish that more people would jump aboard.
Who knows? Maybe we could start something. Maybe we could start a trend.
Totally.
Yeah. But your new album, Neon Noir, is absolutely beautiful. It really does have a lot of emotion demonstrated in it, whether it would be Vertigo Eyes or Run Away from the Sun or the title track. Was there a preconceived vision of what you wanted Neon Noir to sound like, or was this a very experimental and improvisational process?
Oh, that's a tough one because I was building it like a puzzle from a puzzle that you don't know how the full picture is going to be when you start it. So it was song by song, and it took me a while to sort of get the overall vibe for it. But I think the larger themes or the feel of the album, I think it was important for me to not to make a pretentious album. I didn't think that I need to show to anybody that I can, strut my stuff or whatever. What you do when you're a bit younger, especially with him, with a few albums. Now we're going to show that we can do the heaviest riff on earth, and now we're going to show that we can do this and that, which we try to do to the best of our abilities. But on this one, it was really organic, and I was more or less, I was following the song and the sound. If I got a good idea or a good lyric or sort of just a sentiment, I kept on working and honing in on that sentiment as long as it was actually giving me something. And that's an experience I've never had before when creating music, because a lot of times when you're working with a band, there's so many distractions. Who's going to get the coffee? When can we rehearse the next time? When's that? Oh, my strings are old. Who's going to change my strings? And it's like a big kindergarten, and it's beautiful as is. But this time around, I was able to really concentrate and really focus on the minutia of record making, and also because I recorded it by myself. So there was a lot of stuff I've never done before, and I think that you can hear. Hopefully, at least I can hear it. It's a warm and inviting sort of. It has a similarity vibe-wise to Twin Peaks. It's seemingly normal on the outside, but there's a lot of stuff going on the inside that's bursting out. The longer you listen to the album, the weirder it gets. That's also something I wanted to.
It's like the suburbs.
Yeah, yeah, sort of. Yeah, I was thinking in musical terms. I was thinking of "Ritual de la Habitual" by Jane's Addiction, a band I love. And they at that particular album, the whole A side is all the fast rockers, and then it starts to get really weird with the super psychedelic long ones on the B side. And I wanted to sort of expand on the idea. So thank you, Perry Farrell and the lads.
Definitely a great inspiration to have. Being that him was such a collaborative effort, and it was, as you said, a band, and this is, it's Ville Valo on the name of this album. Is it fair to say that this is like a straight self-portrait, you would say? I know that with him there was some fantasy inspirations in there, but this album is mainly just, if people want to get to know who you are, they should start with this album.
Yeah, I think it's the easiest to figure out who I am musically speaking, and maybe even as bits and bobs of my personality, because they're quite integrated along the way. So I think it's a good start. But as well, you have to remember, or I have to remember, that I grew up with him. I met those guys when I was maybe 9 years old. So there's a lot of life experience that happens along the way being in a band. There's insecurities you're hiding at first. So that's maybe the fantasy aspect you mentioned, because it's musician is like a flasher, but it's a flasher that you do want to get caught, and you're not, there's nothing wrong with that sort of flashing, I guess, more or less. So it's quite a hard thing. A lot of musicians or songwriters as well are fairly shy. So it's a weird combination of being a, exhibitionist, sort of like being outward and inward at the same time.
Definitely.
So I think it took a while for with him, and it took that 25 years to be able to be a bit more open. Maybe I'm still not I'm still not on social media, and I'm still not that guy showing off what I have for breakfast, or what's in my wardrobe or whatever. That doesn't interest me at all. But I think that music should, the emotion within music should always be pure. It's even though I do love Kiss, even though I do love Marilyn Manson and Alice Cooper and Ghost, that have those larger than life personalities, which are clearly not true. They're not the real deal everyday person. It's like an extended and enhanced version. But I do believe that it's important to be true, and I think that you can hear that in the music too.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you bring this up, because this is actually a question I'd like to ask a lot of artists, because when I think of your music, whether it would be Neon Noir or any of the work you've done with His Infernal Majesty, there is so much emotion that's channeled into it. But sometimes you're working on a song for days and weeks, maybe even months or years. So do you find it like the longer that you work on something, the harder it is to sort of maintain that emotion that initially sparked the idea?
Actually, no, not at all. I think it's quite funny that there's a song I wrote for the first album for him back in '96, I think it was. The song's called When Love and Death Embrace. And it's one of the songs we always played with him, and now we're playing on the VV tour as well. It's one of those songs when I start singing, it feels exactly like when I wrote it. And that's the magic of music, I think. That you actually do not lose that little spark, whatever. It's not even a spark. It's not a spark that lights up in the dark. It's more like a sense and a color at the same time, like it's emotional, sort of like width of melancholy nostalgia. That's how I feel about the best things, and also other people's music. As you probably know, you hear a song you haven't heard in a while, a song you might have heard ages ago. But say to me, it was like Master of Puppets by Metallica. And you hear like the intro to that album, and all of a sudden, all those memories come right back at you, and all the memories also you've experienced along the way kind of collects. It's like an album. It's like a mental hard drive as well. It collects bits and bobs of your life, and it really stays there. Music can be like a diary, even though you don't have to write the music yourself. But that's the reason I'm a fan of music, and music has always been, it's an integral part of how I see the world and how I function, and how I make sense to it all, because it is quite senseless at times.
Definitely.
And so yeah, so it's a big deal for me. So I see it maybe from a bit different perspective than, let's say, Girls by Motley Crue.
Of course.
Which serves a purpose, of course. There wouldn't be Seventh Veil before, but without that song, or any of the other cool strip clubs on Sunset Strip. Not that I would know anything of them. But,
or me at a slow night shift at Arby's. But there you go.
Yeah, well, everything counts.
Exactly. But it's funny you mentioned that too, because I've always said that art is life, and when you bring it into the world, it can grow and it can develop, and sometimes it can eventually die. So do you find it like that maybe some of your music could also evolve with you as you evolve as an artist, or do you prefer if everything you make is a snapshot of who you are at that particular time?
I think the snapshot is the proof. That's the song printed on an album or whatever. That's the proof that you've done the process. But I think that the process needs to be separated from it, because that's a very personal thing, especially in this one, because I was working by myself. Nobody can see or nobody can feel what I felt when I was working on Neon Noir. And Neon Noir, the album, is just proof that I went through these emotions. So there's quite several little sort of different layers that all are meaningful to me. And I think that since it came from an honest place, the album, you have to let it go at some point. And after that, it's the people's decision, whether the stars are aligned, whether that music hits the right spot at that, because where we are in the world affects as well. If music is going to go down well or just going to go down. So it's a complicated thing, and it's not something I can decide.
Of course.
I can decide when I feel a song is finished, and I can decide when an emotion is strong enough that I feel that it needs to be put down into words and melodies. That's what I can do, and that's pretty much the only thing I can do. And now I can talk about it, but I don't have any control over it afterwards. It's like it's like making your own little snowball and throwing it down the hill.
Yeah.
You can decide where you're going to throw it, but you can't decide whether it's going to roll down and grow into a bigger snowball and eventually where it's going to land or who's going to hit along the way. Cool. So there's a lot of random things there as well, which I think makes it so much more special. It doesn't feel like mathematics.
Absolutely.
It doesn't. Yeah. It feels that of course there are, some sort of rules of physics involved, but there's a little bit of that sort of non-linearity, which I really enjoy.
Well, emotions, I've always said, can sometimes be a very dangerous subject matter to utilize. Like sometimes I've said that artists could become victims of their own product and maybe succumb to the madness of their emotions. And look, as somebody who's listened to Join Me in Death and The Funeral of Hearts, those are very goosebump inducing, very emotional songs. Do you find it that if darkness and emotion is your source of energy, that makes the songwriting process just as deteriorating as it could be cathartic?
I never really thought about the songwriting process being something that takes anything away from you. That I do think that you need to feel pain. No pain, no decent song. I feel that because I feel that whatever you do, if it's art or if it's something or whatever you love in life, if you do, you have to give it your all, which means that you're going to be tired, you're going to be wiped, you're going to be emotionally and physically empty after the whole thing is done. And I think that's how you're supposed to feel. That's like maybe after running a marathon, which I've never done, but you've really given it your all. And that's not necessarily cathartic, or that's not necessarily deteriorating. It's not a negative or necessarily a positive feeling. It's just par for the course. It's something you need to go through, because if you don't feel a thing when you're working on something that you love, it's going to turn out terrible.
Absolutely.
It's like not having the nerves before a gig. That usually means that the gig is going to be really bad. So I think that the element of danger needs to be there, and then regarding the themes you spoke just a second ago, it's also, I think art is about world building. I've built this weird melancholy world with a lot of love and death for the past 30 years, and it's my own realm, it's my own safe zone in which I feel comfortable, and it has its own rules, and it has its own lexicon, its own verbal way of communicating, and that can be interpreted as cringeworthy as well. It's depending on where you come from, because to me it's a combination of the horror movies I watched in the 80s on VHS. Those like super bad copy of a copy of a copy of a copy with Dutch subtitles or whatever, and listen to hard rock and growing up feeling those teenager-y feelings, and that was like late 80s, early 90s sort of thing, getting a bit later. But that was the time when all the alternative rock started happening after the hair metal. So all of a sudden, Jane's Addiction, Faith No More, Bad Brains came up again from a slight hiatus they had back in the day. So the world of music seemed to be really weird, and people were really trying out different things. And I think it all comes down that you're trying to understand everything you see in your own little way and try to explain it to yourself. And because I started writing songs pretty early, I developed this weird combo, this sort of, Vincent Price meeting, I don't know, David Hasselhoff.
Well, I've always said you are the macabre made beautiful in a way. Like, I think that because a lot of people, when they listen to music, not just in metal music, but in any music, they say, oh, this music to help me conquer my demons or help me escape my demons. I feel like you almost found beauty in the demons. I don't think it was necessarily about running away from your demons. I think it was almost kind of like making peace with them or holding your darkest days within your arms or something like that.
Yes, indeed. And Neon Noir is actually, I think that's the theme, the lyrical theme for the whole album. You put it really well. It's about coming to terms with the worst aspects of your life and learning how to deal with them, because we all make mistakes. And what we're hoping not to do is to repeat those same mistakes. But that doesn't mean we're not doing mistakes again.
Of course.
So basically, what I'm celebrating with this is that, come on, life, show me all you got. I'll gladly make new mistakes every day, because that's the only way I'm going to grow and the only way I'm going to learn and turn into hopefully a decent person, sooner than later. But that remains to be seen.
Have you always needed to hear the music before you came up with themes or lyrical ideas, or could your lyrical ideas help dictate the sound of what we hear you're singing over?
Both. I think at times I like the juxtaposition of words and melodies. So I like, let's say, a pretty and a happy chord with the most miserable lyric. I think that can be very powerful. So in essence, the lyric is a part of the music as well, because it's trying to send mixed signals to the listener. And I think that's a powerful tool as well. So they do go hand in hand. And I've never, there are lyricists such as one of everybody's heroes, Nick Cave, that you can read the lyrics in a sense of poetry, and it really holds you strong, and it really has a lot of personality in the way he sort of like holds his tongue is quite spectacular.
Yeah.
On because it's like close to being firmly in the cheek, but not quite. It's that cool, soulful sense of that poetic sense without being too conceited, I guess.
Red Right Hand is one of the best songs ever.
Yeah, and that's a fine line. So, by the same token, I enjoy music with lyrics that you can't really take apart. Let's say Neil Young is a pretty good example. Some of the lyrics feel really weird and really kind of childish and simple and odd. But then when you combine it with the music, you start to get the overall picture, because the music paints that sort of like the sentiment behind the lyrics that sort of like embraces the words. And I think that's very beautiful. And that is super, super powerful. That also the fact that music doesn't necessarily have to go hand in hand thematically with music, but they can play, around this, create tension and all that. And now talking about it sounds quite intellectual, but it does happen on a very sort of instinctual basis when you're actually working on a song.
Well, as somebody, like to hear the lyrics, memories sharp as daggers pierce into the flesh of today, to make that sound so beautiful on Killing Loneliness. Some people could read those on paper and think that that's lyrics to a death metal song. And then,
Yeah.
So
the rest of the guys in the band and the producers, they really wanted me to sing memories instead of memories.
What?
Memories, as in bust, sharp as daggers. So that was the thing with what they were always pushing me to do for. And not on the album, though. That was a joke.
Okay. But, fair enough.
So by that I mean that it's like one of my favorite bands of all time, Typo Negative. It's one of those bands that you can take seriously whenever you choose to as a listener. And then you can take it from a very sort of like jokey perspective. And they're both as valid as an interpretation, aren't they?
Yeah, of course.
And I think that's quite special. It is a game between the artist and the enjoyer of the art.
Definitely.
So if that can be a moving target, it's great. When you can have a sense of humor also about yourself as a listener, and like, oh my God, I'm crying again over this emotional yada yada, but I can't help it and I love it. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Dark humor is like the cure for everything. So
to some, I think.
For some. For me, it's emotional duct tape. It fixes everything.
Yeah, but to me too. I'm not sure if it's ever been studied why melancholy music and darker music makes us feel better. What is the sort of like? It's quite odd, because it would make more sense that if you're feeling bad, to listen to sort of happy music, sort of like this sunshine, sort of, Pet Sounds by Beach Boys or whatever, which is a weird album too. But anyway, you know what I mean, sort of like lighter and sort of more ethereal stuff. But the worse I feel, the harder stuff I listen to. It's always been like that, and it's quite weird. I really don't know if there's so much stuff happening in the subconscious that you're fighting all the time, that you really do need that tiny catharsis every day. You need that to keep on going. We're a weird bunch. We're built in a weird way.
Definitely.
And God bless you.
Definitely. I have 2 more questions for you. In order to get that inspiration, though, that creative force, if you will, to put pen to paper and writing, do you need to be in a specific place to cultivate ideas, or does inspiration just strike out of the blue for you?
I thought when I was younger that I do need a glass of red wine and a quill or something, but and I tried it out and it does work to a certain extent. But I think the cool thing I've realized maybe during the past 5-6 years is just trying to keep the antennas up, because it's not necessarily an inspiration here. It's more about collecting data. It's like the more you see things, the more beautiful sunsets you see, or meet interesting people with interesting stories, it all goes down here somewhere and all mixes up and melts into this one, weird concoction that comes out through, in my case, in music and lyrics. So I think it's an ongoing process. It never really ends. Usually I can write a song basically now. So it's always there. It's like I'm trying to, and I usually work on songs really long periods of time. The longest has been for years. Wow. But nowadays with Neon Noir, I found this new method that I always focus on one song at a time, and I finish it. And once that's done, that's very cathartic, because that's done with, now I'm happy with it, now I'm letting it go, and then I'm moving to the next one, as opposed to the regular sort of how rock bands especially work, or pop artists that you work on 20 songs at the same time, because you can't give them all focus. It's a cool way, and that's the only way that makes sense when you're in a band and when you need an album to get done and all that. But I think that it's more flattering to the song to give it all you have, all your attention, as opposed to sort of zigzag in between emotions, because that also enables me as a writer to stay in that zone, stay in that melody and in that feeling of a song for maybe months at a time, which is odd to say the least. But it is a new way for me to work on music and lyrics. So I'm quite excited. It's nice to be able to find some new ways of approaching the age-old songwriting business,
Absolutely.
And and I think it's important. So that's what I'm sort of like stoked on at the moment, to be, I can, and also I think that you can't remember so many songs at the same time. The coolest way is to not to really write it down. The coolest thing is actually to remember the song, remember the lyrics, and also I think that a lot of times the best lyrics are not written, they're sung. There's quite a difference that you never actually write them down, because you start working. I think a different hemisphere in your brain starts to work when you write them down and you start thinking them in that time. Because if you're only thinking them in a communicational way, and especially communicating with music, so you're communicating with the songs and the melodies and stuff, I think that they get a different flow, and then you're not as picky as about, let's say, repeating words, for example. Love Letting is a good example of that. It's not necessarily the best lyric on the album, but I hear especially the verses that are very 60s. The "Here in my heart an endless sorrow." It's that's the thing I think I never really properly wrote down. I was more like singing it.
That is the best quote I think I've ever heard in my interview career. Good lyrics are not written, they are sang. Because you're right, there are lyrics where on paper they may not sound very good, but then you put you listen to the song in itself, and then it amplifies, and vice versa. There's plenty of songs that may have been hindered as a result of not very good lyrics.
Indeed, I think it's a nice point to keep in mind when working. There's no rhyme or reason. Well, there is, no pun intended, but it's in the eye of the beholder, and it's also one of the things that if you always write down your lyrics, maybe it's a good idea to try it. To write a song in your head, if you can. I can't probably do a whole song, so I need to do some sort of post-it notes on my fridge or whatever. But I'm still trying. I think that Michael Jackson, it's same as when you're recording vocals. It's I think Michael Jackson did Thriller, and that's the thing that he always he'd learn everything by heart, so he didn't have any lyric sheets or anything, so he could just concentrate on singing and emoting, which I think is quite special, because I know as a singer, when you have a sheet of music in front of you and you're stressed out about singing the new music anyway, it's a new song, you don't have the routine for it, you haven't done it bazillion times. Does it sound good? Is my voice in shape? And then you have that sort of, that A4 in front of you with the lyrics, and then you're trying to read it at the same time, and it's a good idea to try to learn that stuff by heart. It becomes like a second nature, and then you get further. You don't even think about the lyrics anymore. You just get into the zone, I think, as they say. And I think that that's quite special.
Yep, and you led me perfectly into the final question, actually, because when it comes to playing live, whether it would be for your solo work or with him, you know, seeing a band live is always a very different experience than seeing the album, especially when you're, you know, bringing songs from different portions of the catalog and different time periods. But, you know, and when you're bringing it in front of an audience, and it becomes an experience that you share with people. And, you know, you're in a venue, whether it would be a dive bar or like, you know, a nice, you know, ballroom or whatever. Either way, it's not in the same place as when you were writing the material and feeling that emotion. So do you feel that a song's meaning or context or emotion changes in a live setting based on that?
Um, what an interesting question. We were talking about the spark and the initial thing that does it stay with you after all the years of repetition or whatever. And I think that as a singer and a songwriter, I have to think that the spark, when you're performing it every night live, I think the spark is exactly the same as it was in When Love It Embrace, exactly the same as it was back in 97 or 96. I think it has to be, because that's your lifeline, you know, and that's, why would it change? Of course, the world around you changes, the acoustics around you change, as you said, you know, maybe a dive ballroom would be my favorite, but of course there's gazillion different variables in when you're touring, but I think that makes it even more important to concentrate on and focus on the essential, which is the core of the song, which is the emotion behind it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if the instrument is out of tune or if you can't really hear yourself, because that happens. It's part of being in a rock band, you know, and it's part of what you do, and your ears might be ringing and everything, and you might be not feeling well, or you know, there's not a lot of people in the audience, and you know, you're just feeling a bit insecure and whatever. The best cure for that is to close your eyes and just sing the song.
Absolutely.
Sing the damn song. You know?
And what's funny is like, you know, I was a late bloomer with him. I'm only 29 years old, and I was like, I think maybe 16 when I first heard Dark Light, my first him album. And like, you know, like, so if you were to play live, say, we're going to go back to 2005, I'm like, okay, but for me, it's taking me back to 2010. It's so, you know, like, it almost seems like the time when we release this stuff is also very relative.
It is. Music is not. It's not a linear thing, and that's cool. But there are things that are not linear. I think it's super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't always have to make sense. You know.
Yeah, that's what music is about. It's not about making sense. Sometimes it could be about the incomprehensible or the idiotic, but in the end, music is all about experience individually.
Yeah, indeed. And in other words, I think that we are in desperate need of the abstract. It's good to have some of that, because there's so much the often mentioned rhyme or reason and the mathematics and the binaries of it all, the ones and zeros. Yeah. It's good to get away from all of that, you know. It's at some time, you know, with music I can, you know, I do that every day. But I think if you do a 9 to 5, and if you have a stressful life and a stressful job, you know, the arts can be great, because they really do take you somewhere else.
That's why I do these interviews.
There you go.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time. Today is actually also the 7-year anniversary of starting this channel, of me getting into the journalism
Congrats.
world. Thank you. So this is a great celebration. Is there just anything else with the release of Neon Noir that you would like to promote in terms of tours, or can you maybe come to the States? We'd love to have you back.
Well, I'm not a salesman. You know, I'd be a terrible car salesman, so I'd rather concentrate on songs. But yeah, we're going to start touring now in Europe in about 2 weeks, starting on Valentine's, and then we're heading over to the States not long after. So we're going to be all around. We're doing Irving Plaza a couple of nights in New York City, and
I live 10 blocks away.
Yeah, you're more than welcome to just we'll hook you up with the guest list and everything if you haven't sorted it out yet. So as you know, that's a cool little dive, like an altar dive.
Yeah, exactly. I live walking distance away from Irving Plaza. I'm like a 10-minute walk. So
yeah, that's fantastic. So I hope to get to see you and your mates as well at the gig, and yeah, it's we just played our first gigs here in Helsinki, and everything went really well. It sounds great. The band I'm touring with, they sound great. It looks great. So I'm feeling very optimistic You know, even though I'm a melancholic bastard, I can have a whiff of optimism in me on an occasion.
You're an angel with horns. You're a walking essence of duality, and I think that's why people like you. And going back to Typo Negative, what you think Peter Steele was miserable all the time? Kenny is a good friend of mine, and he's got stories of the wazoo.
Yeah, they're funny bunch.
Yeah. Oh my God, they got stories. They're hilarious.
I know. Yeah, and those are stories we can't mention here.
Of course. YouTube will take them down. But thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Ville Valo, Neon Noir. Be sure to check it out. It is absolutely beautiful. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Keep it heavy.